Today we're looking at the Collaborative Leadership Initiative and one of the many projects they are currently working on. The Collaborative Leadership Initiative is a partnership between the chiefs of the Southern Chiefs Organization and the mayors and reeves of the WMR. Since 2017, CLI Leaders have been working through a process of reconciliation facilitated by the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources. The leaders have identified the protection of clean water, waste management, increasing economic opportunities, and good jobs as potential areas for collaborative action. The priorities identified by the CLI leaders also align with several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 6 and 15. SDG 6 is Clean Water and Sanitation, which identifies access for all to clean water and proper sanitation. SDG 15 is Life on Land, which addresses the need to manage and protect forests and land from degradation and loss of biodiversity. This summer, several projects are underway across the region to pilot the use of green infrastructure to protect our water, our land, and our communities. One of these projects is currently being completed in the village of Dunottar. Today we're going to talk with Chris Penner from Ecological Restoration Services to find out a bit more.
There's two projects, and I'll start with the first one, which was initiated in 2019 to test the use of duckweed in a lagoon in a very small enclosure. I should probably mention what duckweed actually is. It's actually a vascular plant. It's not algae. It's a higher plant that produces seed and flowers, but it's also the world's smallest flowering plant, and it grows hydroponically in mats over top of nutrient-enriched waters. When you dig down into the literature, you find that duckweed itself has an enormous appetite for nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and those are basically, if you want to boil it down, those are the two nutrients that are largely responsible for algae problems in our freshwater ecosystems. Lake Winnipeg being a good example of that. On small farms, it's used, it's harvested off the surface of water and fed to livestock and small farming operations. It can be used as a soil conditioner, much the same way we would use peat. But anyways, going back to the study, there's a precedent for this kind of, for the use of duckweed to treat water in Devil's Lake, North Dakota. That's probably the closest example to Winnipeg, where there's a 60-acre duckweed water filtration facility tacked on to the end of a municipal lagoon system or wastewater treatment facility. So back in 2018, I became aware of this facility in Devil's Lake and wrote a proposal, put a team together and wrote a proposal to get funding to do a little research to test the idea in a similar manner in a lagoon in the village of Dunottar. And that was 2019. 2020, that study just wrapped up, and it was really just a small enclosure that we grew duckweed on, but we proved that you could grow duckweed in our lagoon up here, and you could also harvest it, and we looked at how much nutrient you could take off of a lagoon on a per acre basis too there. Now the second project is this new one with the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources through the Collaborative Leadership Initiative. We're basically taking that same thing and scaling it up, just to see how it would work on a larger scale. I've annexed a portion of the lagoon, up to an acre of the lagoon, and I've inoculated the site with duckweed and put various structures in place to contain the duckweed in one place, and set it up to allow it to populate. It has a very explosive growth rate. At optimal temperatures, this plant can increase its biomass by 2 times every 48 hours. And so it's busy populating the enclosure right now, and that's where I'm at. We're going to hopefully do our first harvest within 2 or 3 weeks. We've lost a lot of wetland capability on our landscape, and wetlands are really good at keeping our water clean. But we don't really have that anymore, and we have to look for other ways to treat our water to try to take up those nutrients. Wetlands are very good at removing and storing nutrients permanently in wetland soils. This idea of using duckweed to remove nutrient from sources of nutrient, like for instance a lagoon, is essentially, in my mind, viewed as an alternative to wetland construction. So nutrient comes off farm fields, especially in the spring through soil erosion. Nutrient enters our freshwater systems through just as those rivers go through cities. So there's urban and rural sources of nutrient, much more nutrient than our natural systems can really handle. And as a result, all that nutrient winds up in, let's say, a terminal basin, kind of like Lake Winnipeg, and they cause or fuel these massive algae blooms that we've been hearing about for, I guess, a couple of decades now in Lake Winnipeg. A lot of that algae that forms across the surface in these huge mats in Lake Winnipeg in the South Basin and in the North Basin. At the end of the year, that algae floats to the bottom of the lake and it begins to decompose in that anaerobic environment under the water. And that uses a lot of oxygen to do that. And therefore, because of these massive quantities of biomass that spend the summer on the surface and then sink to the bottom in winter and stay there for years, it just decomposes, uses up oxygen, and creates these oxygen dead zones or oxygen depleted zones in Lake Winnipeg, which is not good for the health of the lake. There are other attributes as well, but that's certainly a very important one. So the duckweed example it's another arrow in the quiver, if you will, in weapons we have against the degradation of freshwater habitat. And using duckweed in a lagoon is one example, but it's certainly not limited to that at all. The key to me is finding a feasible and economically responsible way to use that harvested biomass, and finding a way to harvest it and use it that is either cost neutral or potentially even profitable. And I really like the idea of investigating the use of duckweed harvested off of a lake, for instance, maybe not a lagoon, but off of a lake. Harvesting duckweed off of Lake Winnipeg, removing massive quantities of nutrient, and then using that biomass either as a peat substitute. It could potentially be even used as bioethanol, for instance. That's the next thing I'd like to explore. So I guess that's the broader issue, is just using our built environment in a manner that incorporates environmental goods and services, and putting wetlands in subdivisions, building wetland capacity into our provincial water drainage infrastructure, for instance, and also in this particular case, removing excess nutrient from a lagoon.
Chiefs from the Southern Chiefs Organization and mayors and reeves from the Winnipeg metropolitan region are working together to bring different perspectives and knowledge systems to the table that will help their communities confront common challenges. Together, the Collaborative Leadership Initiative is working towards meeting the goals of SDG 6, Clean Water and Sanitation, and 15, Life on Land. Together, these leaders are showing us how to collaborate for a more sustainable region.